Good evening, and welcome to a spooktacularly creepy episode of Furries in the Media, the series that reviews videos and other media based on how the furry fandom is represented. I will be your host, Aberguine. And I will be your parasite, Sam. What are we covering on this dreadful evening, Aberguine? Well, first, Sam, I have a confession to make. There's something else I love about as much as I love furries. I love horror films. Really, I never would have guessed. But most horror films that I've seen have absolutely nothing to do with furries. With a rare exception. Tonight's review is on a 2016 indie horror film directed by Zachary Thurman called Furry Nights. It's a movie about some teenagers who go into the woods to make their own movie and are terrorized by bloodthirsty furries. The film's tagline, "They're coming for you." Boo! This sounds like it's gonna be really cheesy. Well, I'd hold off on the Munster cheese until afterwards if I were you.
Really?
Just a heads up, this movie contains mature language, drug and alcohol use, implied nudity, implied sex, an adult toy makes an appearance, and what good horror movie would be complete without blood and gore? While we're at it, I might use some stronger language in this review too, why the hell not? Also, there will be spoilers in this review, so if you want to go check it out real quick, go search for Furry Nights on YouTube. Go pop some popcorn, grab some pumpkin juice or a pumpkin-flavored beer, and without further ado, let's get into this FURightful flick. The movie opens with a scene of a hunter taking a shot at what he thinks is a fox, but later that night he is pursued by unseen entities that make animal noises before he is dragged out of frame and killed. The next morning, we meet a group of 6 teenagers who are filming their own horror movie. First up, we have Jack, the aspiring director with a camera surgically attached to his hand, who is willing to sacrifice anything to make the best movie possible, as long as anything is his actors. We also have Mark, the track star playing the lead role, and Brian, the wacky friend playing the monster. For the girls, we have Hannah, Mark's girlfriend, playing the role of the lead's girlfriend, and we have Jessica, another actress in the film who actually seems to be a decent person. Oh yeah, and we also have Maddie, whose only defining character traits are drinking, smoking, and speaking fluent sarcasm. I'm still not sure what exactly her role is in making the movie. First up in the film's production is a makeout scene between Mark and Hannah. Mark and Jack try to pressure Hannah to take off her top so that Jack can get a shot of her exposed breasts, because according to Jack, quote, "the booby shot is the essence of a horror film." Then we get a montage of the film's production throughout the day, including such highlights as Jack and Brian arguing about the film's writing, and Jack's unsuccessful attempts to get a shot of Hannah's breasts. That evening, Jack and Jessica are filming one last scene when they see a campfire across the lake and a bunch of furries doing stereotypical furry stuff. There's a poodle, a wolf and a bear doing more than some dance floor bumping and grinding, a dog giving some sort of tail job to a kangaroo, and lastly we have well, what is it? A rabbit. So... not just any rabbit. That rabbit.
Oh my lord.
Jack gets footage of the furry's antics on his camera, and he shows it to the rest of the gang back at their campsite. Hannah identifies them as furries, saying that they, quote, dress up like animals to, you know. Jack talks about selling the footage to National Geographic, and the whole group seems to be simultaneously weirded out and intrigued, but they're ultimately suspicious of the furries. After everyone else has gone to sleep for the night, Mark keeps watch of the gun. He hears a noise and gets up to investigate. We cut to Jessica lying in the tent as she wakes up from Mark's flashlight sweeping the area. Just as she's about to fall back asleep, we hear a gunshot. Brian and Jack tell the girls to stay in the tent, and they go see what has happened. Mark has mistaken a bear furry for a real bear and killed him. Jack freaks out, but Brian keeps him quiet. The 3 guys dump the furry's body in the lake. The wolf furry finds the bear's costume head and grieves the loss of his friend before seemingly finding his resolve to seek vengeance. The next day, the teens try to continue filming, but there's tension because Jack desperately wants to tell the girls what happened the previous night, but Mark and Brian prevent him from doing so. They all see the wolf furry across the lake, waving menacingly at them.
He's just standing there. Menacingly!
Later that night, Jack can't find the car keys and suspects that the furries have stolen them. Jessica goes off by herself and is killed by the wolf. The group becomes suspicious that the furries are antagonizing them. Brian and Hannah go to look for Jessica, leaving Jack, Mark, and Maddie at the campfire. Maddie snarkily suggests that they tell scary stories, and Jack confesses to what they did, but Maddie is too wasted to understand or care as she heads into the tent for more beer. Jack and Mark hear a noise, and Jack sees something through the night vision on his camera, and he jumps into the car and turns on the headlights to reveal the furries have come for them. Mark immediately shoots one of the furries, and then the rest of the furries attack, but he is able to get away. Jack tries calling 911, but lucks out in the worst way possible as the operator just happens to be an active member of the National Furry Association and will not stand for closed-minded judgments about furries. As the sequence goes on, she can be heard ranting about how furries have a right to peaceful assembly and how she dresses as a dolphin and is turned on by unicorns. In the fracas, the kangaroo is mortally wounded, and Maddie, still inebriated, pokes her head out of the tent to ask if there's any chicken nuggets. The wolf whacks her in the head with a bottle. Then he steals the dying kangaroo's joey, lights it on fire, and tosses it into the tent, setting it ablaze. Don't worry, it's not a real joey, it's just a stuffed animal. Oh, that makes me feel a lot better. Thanks. Hannah and Brian discover the bear's costume on the dock, and then Mark finds them, and now they're all being chased by the furries. In a fleeting moment of bravery, Jack gets out of the car and puts on the kangaroo costume. Mark is eventually caught by the furries and dragged back to camp. Jack, now acting as the kangaroo, plays possum as the furries come into the camp, and he slowly stands up like he's recovering from being hit. Hey, Kangaroo Jack! Get it? You get it? Yeah, we got it. The wolf discovers that Jack is missing from the car and is clearly angry with the kangaroo for letting him get away, but he then seems to make up with him. The furries rough up Mark for a bit more before finally killing him by one of the most creative means that I've ever seen. The wolf and poodle wrap their tails around Mark's neck and run in opposite directions, snapping Mark's neck. Jack, camera still in hand, quietly whispers to himself that he wishes he could help his friend. Back in the woods, Brian and Hannah find a shed to take shelter in, and they find that Maddie has already taken shelter there too. She was able to escape the tent before it had caught fire. Brian tells the girls what happened, and says it's Mark's fault, but they should be safe since it's Mark the furries want. Maddie is just about to kick Brian and Hannah out of her hiding spot when the furries arrive and catch Hannah through a hole in the wall. Brian and Maddie leave Hannah behind and lock the gate behind them because they're assholes. Hannah is able to break free, and she runs to the gate. The furries break into the shed, but Hannah is able to squeeze through the gate, which tears off all her clothes except her underwear. The rabbit busts down the gate with a tractor and runs over Hannah with some sort of farming implement that is capable of shredding a human body. One of Hannah's breasts happened to land in front of Jack, who quietly celebrates getting his coveted booby shot. Jack discovers that the car keys are on the poodle's tail, and in an attempt to recover them, he pulls the poodle's tail, which she takes as an invitation to dance the horizontal tango with him. Brian and Maddie make it back to the campsite, where Brian picks up a flashlight, Maddie picks up another cider, and they see Mark's body before running away again. Jack successfully recovers the car keys, and he heads to the car to drive to safety, but not before taking out the poodle first. Brian and Maddie then find an abandoned house and barricade the doors and windows with what can only be described as the worst possible objects to barricade with. The furries show up to terrorize them, and Brian shoots the wolf with a handgun he's found in the house, and the wolf and rabbit run off. Jack is on a paved road to freedom when he has a change of heart and the growth of a spine, and he turns the car around and goes back for his friends. Brian is nervously patrolling the house when Maddie decides, with the worst possible timing, to mess with him, pulling the old "there's something behind you" routine. Brian, in similarly poor timing, confesses his love for Maddie, who rejects him. Forgetting that he is in a horror movie, Brian runs from the room and removes the barricade from the front door, and who should be there but the wolf? Brian tries to run back to Maddie, but the rabbit kills him with a chainsaw. Maddie shoots and kills the rabbit and fights with the wolf before Jack heroically shows up in his kangaroo costume. Jack manages to pull off the wolf's tail and realizes that it never was held in place by a belt loop. Jack then reaches into his kangaroo pouch to put on a pair of boxing gloves. He gets in a couple of good swings and even a kangaroo-style kick on the wolf before losing his upper hand. Both of his hands. The wolf cuts off Jack's hands with a machete. The wolf then runs his machete through Jack's head, killing him. In the chaos, Maddie is able to get into the car and drive away, and the wolf chases her down the road before she finally gets away. The wolf stands in the middle of the road, blood dripping from the machete, and he takes off the blood-spattered costume head, dropping it onto the asphalt and walking away. No face reveal. Now let's take a look at the review stats. Information accuracy is 0%, and the spirit is also 0%, coming to a horrifying average of, you guessed it, 0%. And now time for my thoughts. Is Furry Nights a good or accurate representation of furries? No. Despite the film's wildly inaccurate portrayal of furries, Furry Nights still manages to be a snooze fest. Of course, any furry-centric review of this film would be remiss if it didn't address the elephant in the room. The thing that makes the furries the villains of this film is that they have sex in animal costumes. They also kill people. Yes, they do, but let's put that aside for now. Given that horror movies often utilize exploitative stereotypes in order to play upon the audience's fears, I'm not even a little bit surprised that Furry Nights relied on the stereotype that furry is sexual in nature in order to make the furries into the villains. I went into this movie with that expectation, and the only thing that would have surprised me would have been if it didn't go that way. But if I'm being honest, this isn't the most egregious stereotyping of furries that I've seen in respect to this particular misconception. Yes, it's definitely there, and it seems to be the main reason why the teens are unsettled by the furries even before the furries begin murdering them, but it's not like the furries are constantly humping every time they're shown on screen.
You were saying something about the furries murdering people?
Yeah, I'd argue that that has nothing to do with them being furries. Whoever these individuals are, retribution seems to be very important to them, and I think that would be true no matter what costumes they do or don't wear. Also, the furries didn't start killing anybody until one of their own was killed first, which I think is a little more defensible, but make no mistake, the furries were definitely in the wrong too. I bet that furry 911 operator would have been on their side, so they clearly had other non-violent options available to them. But let's move on to the other inaccuracies in this film.
Yeah, how was Jack able to turn on the headlights before he got the keys?
I meant as far as the furries are concerned.
Oh, right you are.
First off is the fact that all of the furries are shown wearing cheap, rental, mascot-style costumes, but the one that I personally find the most offensive is that damned Easter Bunny costume. I swear, every time there's a bad portrayal of furries, this particular costume always shows up. It's like I'm haunted by this rabbit or something. The rest of the costumes really aren't any better, but I have seen newer furries use this particular wolf mask as a sort of beginner's fursuit. While I'd love to continue ragging on the film's use of rental costumes, I get that filmmaking is expensive, so while these may not be accurate to what real fursuits look like, I get why they were used. One thing that I will rag on is the film's implication that furries live in their costumes 24/7, even in life or death scenarios. Even the best constructed fursuit heads still have blind spots and hand paws impede dexterity and range of motion, as does the rest of the suit, not to mention it gets stiflingly hot inside a fursuit too. To put it bluntly, you ain't gonna be running after shit while wearing one of these. The furries are also portrayed as being overly committed to acting like animals, sometimes to their own detriment. Furries often do roleplay as their personas, or furry personas, and it's not uncommon for them to make animal-like vocalizations when they do. But furries are also aware that there are limits to this, and they know good and damn well that it's not cute to go rummaging around someone else's campsite in the middle of the night while pretending to be a bear. While it is true that some fursuiters choose not to speak while in costume, I think the self-preservation instinct would override wanting to stay in character, or pretending to be an animal, or whatever it is this movie thinks the furries are doing. Then we have the furry 911 operator, and this is where I actually saw a little bit of myself in this movie. I personally found this to be a humorous look in the mirror as she was ranting about furries having the right to assemble peaceably, despite the obvious danger the furries posed in the scene. But let's be real, a 911 operator who is any good at their job should be able to put their furriness aside and send out emergency services.
Yeah, why didn't she do her job when she knew that a furry was hurt?
I guess the implication is that anyone mentioning furries in any context would have been enough to set her off on that rant. Who knows?
What would this movie look like with real furries?
It would be a really boring movie. I bet most of the furries wouldn't have brought their fursuits into the woods even if they did have one. The fox in the opening scene would have just drank water from a bottle, avoiding the hunter altogether. The rest of the furries would have probably moved their campsite away from the annoying teenagers. The bear furry would have just pretended to be Yogi Bear in the privacy of his own campsite instead of wandering into someone else's. Putting the costumes and role-playing aside, furries are just regular people, and realistically, they would behave just like anyone else. Which actually leads me to my next point. I don't think the furries make for compelling villains in this film. I personally don't find them to be intimidating, scary, unsettling, or even all that creepy. They're just portrayed as people who have sex in animal costumes and seek murderous vengeance when one of their friends is killed. As far as horror movies go, that's tame.
Domestic even.
Don't get me wrong though, some of the most iconic horror villains wear masks, but the mask is not what makes them good horror villains. I feel like you could swap the furries out for Leatherface and the story would be almost exactly the same. Hell, that would actually be a better movie.
How would you make the furries into better villains?
Well, first things first, I do want to clarify that despite having made my own Halloween skit a few years ago, I don't fancy myself a horror director, but I refuse to believe that Furry Nights is the best that anyone could ever come up with as far as making furries into effective horror villains. In fact, I'm convinced that it's totally possible to make a good horror film with furries as the villains without relying on the misconception that they have sex and animal costumes. Most furries aren't physically imposing like Jason or Michael Myers, so I would avoid trying to cast them as a traditionally scary or intimidating villain. I think the next best bet might be to play them up as creepy and unsettling. Maybe the protagonist meets a group of people who seem pretty chill, but the more the main character gets involved, the more oddities they notice about this group before learning they're furries. Maybe there's an element of the supernatural. I bet there's some way werewolves could be worked into it. Hell, some people are just creeped out by the costumes themselves, and there's an entire video game franchise built on that very fear. If the serious route doesn't work, then why not shoot for comedy? Remember how I said that fursuits have a bunch of blind spots and limit the wearer's mobility? What if a furry started terrorizing the protagonist over something as small as having a drink accidentally spilled on their fursuit, even after the protagonist tries to do the right thing by offering to pay for repairs? And not to mention that there are always so many opportunities for corny puns.
So Aberguine, would you say Furry Nights is a good horror film?
I just thought it was kinda meh.
Are you sure that's not because you're a furry?
I said it was meh, not I want my hour and a half back. I've watched plenty of horror movies, from the good to the bad to the so bad it's actually good, and most of the ones that fail to leave a lasting impression on me, whether it's good or bad, fall into the meh category, and for me, Furry Nights is just another one of those movies. I wasn't scared or creeped out by the furries, and the teens that I'm supposed to root for are just shitty people. Jessica seemed cool though. I didn't even feel like cheering for the furries because they were kinda boring. This movie wasn't even fun in a cheesy way, and I actually love campy horror comedies. I knew this movie wasn't going to be good, but I really wanted so badly to have some sort of cheesy or campy fun with this movie. But aside from that one pun in the film's tagline, I didn't even get that. My verdict is that if you're hosting a Halloween movie marathon, I'd skip this one. This would be much better for a Halloween party where nobody's really going to sit down and watch a movie, but you need something in the background.
Hey, it looks like the director is hoping to remake Furry Nights with a bigger budget.
Huh. Well, we'll have to review it sometime after it comes out. I wouldn't expect furries to be portrayed any more accurately than before, but I just hope they're made into better villains. Now, I actually watched Finley, one of Zachary Thurman's new horror shorts, and I really enjoyed it. He's definitely gotten a lot better at his craft, so I really hope that the furries are made into better villains the second time around.
You know, I kinda wanted this movie to be cheesy.
Yeah, we're just gonna have to bring our own cheese to the table. Cheese me.
Can I start you off with any appetizers?
Yes, I'll have the charcuterie board, but I just want all the cheese, so no meat, fruit, or bread.
Okay, so a charcuterie board with some cheese.
No, I don't think you heard me. I said all the cheese.
Roll the cheese! Cheddar! Ah! Cheddar whizzes! Wensleydale.
I like them more cheese too.
Dangerously cheesy.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Furries in the Media. Happy Halloween, y'all. Have fun, stay awesome. Bye-bye.